This is probably one of the most hyped up guys in Houston at the moment. Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. He's very talked about. You've seen him on Saw Sports. He's been on my channel. He's been on many other channels, radio host today. And since we did a video on Lewis Riddick, I thought it would be a great video to talk about some guy who is not being talked about, but the guy that the Houston people want as the next GM for the Houston Texans. We're going to be discussing Gerrick Jones next. Ladies and gentlemen, let's cue the intro.
It's the city of the dream team. Hakeem, Two-Ring, Beyonce, yeah, me. And I remember hot summer, hot winter. I couldn't fight, so the block.
So, like I'm saying, Gerrick Jones he's former player for the Houston Texans. I think played about 2 or 3 years with us. Has been putting his name out there as a man who wants to be the next GM for the Houston Texans, right? If you watch my channel, if you watch any other content creators, you know that Gerrick Jones really wants to be the GM for the Houston Texans. A lot of people want him to be the GM for the Houston Texans. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what kind of experience does Gerrick Jones have? Well, he's a commissioner of the State's Development of Football League. He's the National Players Association Houston chapter. He's the treasurer for the Houston Texans, I believe. He's the director of diversity and inclusion webinar. He's business development. He's the president of the Huddle Foundation of Houston. You know, the guy has certainly been around football for a very, very long time in his life. You know, he's been in Harvard Business School. He has all these accolades, all this stuff. And, you know, a lot of people are not talking about him because, you know, he doesn't have any NFL front office experience. But does that mean that he shouldn't get the job? That remains to be seen. If you look at what Gerrick Jones is saying, Gerrick Jones is saying he wants to build a team around Deshaun Watson. He wants to build a culture. He wants to build a sort of family, and that's something that the Houston Texans doesn't have. You know, he's been the most vocal. He's been the most vocal for every loss, every win, every decision that the Houston Texans have made. Gerrick Jones has been there, and that's why you kind of have to talk about him if you're a Houston Texans content creator, because Gerrick Jones is doing what a lot of people will never do, and that is put himself on the line, allows criticism to come wherever it comes from. He answers it. You know, I've certainly given him my criticism as well. I've certainly heard what he has a lot to say, you know, and it's interesting to know what he will bring to the table. Now I'm gonna let you guys know who towards the end of this, series about GMs and who I want to. I'm not gonna answer that question right now, but I think it's very noble of what Gerrick Jones is doing. Does that mean that he needs, does that mean that he deserves this GM job? Absolutely not. And I think he knows that too. I think he knows that this has been a grind. This is going to continue to be a grind. And I think, because there's a good chance that Mr. Gerrick Jones does become the GM. But I think that every wrong move the Houston Texans do, Gerrick Jones is going to be there. And the fans will be lobbying for Gerrick Jones. They already have. I think it is inevitable that Gerrick Jones does end up somewhere with the Houston Texans. I think there's too much noise around the city of Houston to not allow him to be in there, whether that's a GM or not. It could be another position. But he's shown that he's willing to learn. He is willing to, be a team player. But Gerrick Jones does interest me. So is Lewis Riddick. If you're asking me who am I leaning between the two, I'm gonna say Lewis Riddick's a little bit more. But Gerrick Jones is somebody that people really need to talk about because we've seen this situation and this situation really just happened to me. Someone who really deserves the job, someone who really outperforms, gets passed up by somebody else. And that's just the way it is. If you're the Houston Texans, do you take a look at Gerrick Jones? Do you bring him in for an interview? Do you really see, do the Houston Texans take a chance and see what he could bring? I don't know. I'm not the Houston Texans. But what we do know is that the Houston Texans are looking very carefully into every GM hire that they get. One thing about Gary Jones is you got to commend for what he's doing. Even if it doesn't work out, you have to commend him what he's doing. Like I said, I think it's inevitable he ends up with the Texans in one way, shape, or form. But that's another topic for another day. Gary Jones, guys, what do you think? Do you think he'll be a great addition? Do you think the Houston Texans should definitely take a look at him? And do you think they should hire him? I think he should be looked into. Why not? You're the Texans. You can do whatever the hell you want. Look into every option, outside option. Don't be afraid to go out the box. Is that taking a chance on Gary Jones? Who knows? But the Houston Texans definitely have a hard job coming up, and we're going to see what they do. Let me know what you think. As always, guys, go Texans. You'll have a blessed day.